You're live, Professor.
So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to the NEI Digital Round Tables. With these roundtables, we aim to discuss aspects of research conducted at the Núcleo de Estudos Irlandeses at UFSC with scholars and artists from Ireland and from the Irish Studies global community. In 2022, UFSC and NEI are taking part in the project Ulysses100 Through Brazilian Eyes, launched by the Embassy of Ireland in Brazil to celebrate the centenary of the publication of James Joyce's Ulysses. So this is the first activity of NEI related to this project. So I would like to thank the presence of Ambassador Sean Hoy today, the leadership and guidance of Natalia Araújo at the Embassy, the support of Professor Fábio Lopes, Director of the Center of Communication and Expression at UFSC, of Professor Luis Fernando Pereira at the Arts Department, and our colleagues at the postgraduate program in English, Professor José Roberto O'Shea and Annelise Corseio, postdoctoral researchers, Dr. Melina Savi and Dr. Janaína Rosa, and of course, special thanks and recognition to Professor Aline Fernandes, who coordinates NEI and the Ulysses100 project at UFSC. So the seventh NEI Roundtable, Contemporary Joyces, explores a range of contemporary approaches to James Joyce's family, life, work in literature, exhibition, curation, film, radio, drama, and dance. So our guest speakers today are Nuala O'Connor, who is an acclaimed Irish novelist, short story writer, and poet. She is the author of 5 novels, including Nora, a love story of Nora and James Joyce, and Miss Emily, on the life of Emily Dickinson, for example. She has published 7 short story collections, including, for example, Birdie and Joyride to Jupiter and Mother America. Her poetry collections include The Juno Charm and Portrait of the Artist with a Red Car. She has won and been nominated for numerous prizes for her work. And Nora, her 5th novel, is the 2022 choice for the One Dublin, One Book initiative. She is also the curator of the exhibition Love Says Bloom at MoLI, the Museum of Literature Ireland in Dublin. And I'm delighted to say that Nuala was in Brazil back in 2012 for the Symposium of Irish Studies in South America in Natal. Alan Gilsenan, who was also in Brazil many times and to other places in South America, is an award-winning Irish writer, filmmaker, and theater director. His diverse body of work extends across documentary, feature films, and experimental work. His many productions include the experimental film, A Vision, A Life of W.B. Yeats, the feature film Unless, Meetings with Ivor, which is a cinema documentary about the radical psychiatrist Ivor Brown, the documentary series Daniel O'Connell, Forgotten King of Ireland, and the film installation inspired by Joyce's Ulysses for Dublin's MoLI, again, the Museum of Literature Ireland, Ulysses Film. He has just completed The Ghost of Bagotania, a film poem about the literary flourishing in the Dublin of the 1940s and 1950s. In a way, I don't know, it speaks to Ulysses in the sense that it is an autobiographical exploration of the city. So Alan has, as I said, has strong links with Irish studies here, so we are delighted to say hello to him again. And Colin Murphy is a writer for stage and screen, journalist and documentary maker. As a playwright, he has a long association with Fishamble, the new play company, which has commissioned most of his political dramas. His most recent play, The Treaty, about the 1921 Anglo-Irish Treaty, was performed at the National Concert Hall in Dublin and at the Embassy of Ireland in London. Inside the GPO was written and performed as part of the 1916 centenary of the Easter Rising. Guaranteed and Bailed Out were produced by Fishamble and subsequently adapted for the screen. Guaranteed was also staged here as a rehearsed reading in 2015 as part of a cycle of Irish documentary plays. His radio work, which is our theme today, includes Roger Casement's Apocalypse Now and the United States versus Ulysses, currently available at RTÉ Drama One. And our fourth speaker today is Áine Stapleton. She works in dance, film, and music. She has been consistently developing work about Lucia Joyce, daughter of James Joyce, since 2014. Lucia, I'm sure she will explain, was a talented dancer and artist who was incarcerated in psychiatric institutions for a long period of her life. Horrible Creature, her film of 2019, is a feature length based on Lucia's time in Switzerland. And Áine's first film, Medicated Milk from 2015, is an introductory exploration of Lucia's life and parallels the life experiences of both Lucia and the director. We are very pleased to welcome Áine for the first time in Brazil at UFSC, even if digitally. So the moderators who join me today are Aline Fernandes, Vice Coordinator of our program, of postgraduate program in English, coordinator of NEI and of the Ulysses100 project at UFSC, and Kathleen Mara Rosa, who is a former PhD student at our university at UFSC, and is now a postdoctoral research fellow at the Department of Film Studies at Trinity College Dublin, with funding of the Irish Research Council. So thank you very much, everybody, for being here. Thank you as ever, Carol and Harissa, for the background tech part of this event. And now I would like to invite Ambassador Sean Hoy, who will open this event with a couple of words. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Beatrice, and good afternoon, everybody. It's always a pleasure to be involved, and I hope that we soon move from these online events to meeting in person. Maybe it'll be a little bit more than a few words. I once saw some black and white movie where it said, "Never give a Mick a mic." So if you're giving the Irishman the floor, I actually have a few things I want to say, but it's because the subject today is very relevant to where we are on our journey here in Brasilia and in São Paulo with the Consulate in terms of celebrating Joyce. And I'd just like to talk about our project, Brasil100 pelos olhos brasileiros. So it's Brasil100 Through Brazilian Eyes. And this story probably starts about 12 years ago when I was in Vietnam, and we had a new ambassador that arrived, and we were showing her around the embassy, and in the corner of the store was a large collection of zipped up, these zip up stands, and she asked our administrator, what was that? And the administrator gave it a kick with her right foot, and she said, "That is James Joyce." And what we had there in the corner of the store was all these pull-ups that had been presented, organized in Dublin. I hope not by anybody here, but I'm not sure because I never actually saw them. But they had been on tour around a couple of countries in Southeast Asia. They had been used in some places in Vietnam, and they ended up in our store. And I think I parked that in a bit because I don't know where they are now, but the embassy has changed. So they're definitely not in the same place. But it was an exhibition that we commissioned in Foreign Affairs at probably quite a bit of cost. We sent around the world and then it ran out of time and it was parked in the corner. But then if I fast forward maybe another 5 or 6 years, when I was in Nigeria, and I started to realize in Nigeria that when I met Nigerians and they started talking to me about Ireland, and especially about Irish people, that had influenced them. And most of them were teachers and a lot of them in the religious orders. They described the same people that taught many of us in a very different way. They were champions to, because you're a poor country that just become independent, a teacher that gives a young man or woman a chance in life to get on becomes, a very important part of their life. And it struck me that, we have become quite complacent about our teachers. Education is a kind of a necessary evil, especially in secondary school. And I started to realize that we were broadcasting ourselves as Irish people, as Irish diplomats, with our vision of ourselves and expecting that others would receive that unchallenged. But that Nigerians saw us in a very different way and saw us in a much more positive way than we did ourselves. And I proposed at the time that we would do something, that was Ireland through Nigerian eyes. It wasn't possible because we just couldn't, we wanted this to be a short video, but we just couldn't find anybody that could do it, or anybody that could do it within a defendable budget. And then when I came to Brazil, it's an additional challenge because you're working through a language. So, and Ireland is not well known in Brazil in comparison to Nigeria and Africa. But we are known in certain ways. And one thing that has always amazed me is that Bloomsday is celebrated in 14 cities across this massive country. And I've always taken that as a very positive platform for us to build our cultural work. And then I think during one visit to São Paulo, Owen mentioned to me that there's a street in particular where there's a whole walkway of murals. And the consulate was thinking of commissioning a mural, but eventually it didn't happen because it just got too complicated with the bureaucracy and different interests. But I took away from that, why don't we take the 14 cities and see if we can get 4 more, and let's have 18 universities. I visited many of the universities, many of them built in the 60s with concrete architecture, lots of blank walls. A lot of them require some paint. They're 50, 60 years old now in many cases. And the whole idea of painting murals in these universities to be discussion points was something I thought was possible. So you've already mentioned Natalia Araujo here and Maeve, who works with me. And I just shared this concept and they have made it work. They have operationalized it. We have 18 partners. We have 18 different universities spread throughout the country, north, south, east, and west, including in the Amazon, which I'll come back to in a second. And, the fact that we allocated each of them a different chapter of Ulysses, because we knew there'd be a lot of competition for some of them. Some of them are a lot easier to portray visually than others. So we allocated them randomly, and the process has begun. And I think the process is the important part, because I participated last week in 3 of the opening lectures, and I'll participate in another one next week, where the English language department is describing Ulysses to artists and to students. And then they're hearing this and they're thinking of how they're going to present this into a mural that's going to go into a competition, firstly within the university, and then ultimately each of them will produce one winning piece, which we have budgeted, and that will be painted and that will stay in place for a minimum of a year. And we have a lot of pictures of the areas that have been allocated. They're in very public areas and they will become very valid discussion pieces. But what I realized was, what do we want the outcome of this to be? We do not want to summarize the book into 18 murals, because that would be, in a sense, making it into a graphic novel. And if you wanted to start by putting something in a graphic novel, you wouldn't start with Ulysses, because most of the action is internal, and it would be very hard to make it into a good action novel that way. But I think the important part is the process, and that is how we can see the interpretation through Brazilian eyes. And where I am at this stage is that we have to record the process, be it in a video or through a book. My preference would be a book, because this is something that, and we will start to talk to private private partners, because, you know, coffee table books are very popular in Brazil. They're not so popular in other parts of the world. But if we had 500 copies as a minimum, this is something we could give to every one of our embassy around the world and give them a copy to give to the Brazilian embassy everywhere around the world. I think would be really attractive proposal. But, you know, just going back to the Amazon, I think if we're talking about reimagining Joyce 100 years after Ulysses has been published, the fact that his work was discussed last Friday night at 6 p.m. when anybody else would be going for a beer at the end of a week. You know, I was talking to lecturers and students in the Amazon, and I wondered, you know, what Joyce ever knew about the Amazon 100 years ago. He knew about Roger Casement because he's actually in the Cyclops chapter, and he would have known about his work in Putumayo, but he may have known very little else about Brazil. So I got a huge kick out of that, you know, just, you know, having been to that area and the difficulty of painting a mural in those conditions and making it last. So I just wanted to share that with you and to say, you know, it's not the output for me, it's the process. And it will be fascinating to see, because, you know, I watched the film you made for MoLI, Alan, again over the weekend. And, you know, there are certain symbols that we use, for example, the kidney frying on the pan. In this part of the world, a kidney is something you put in your chili con carne, and it's a bean. So I'm going to have a completely open mind, but, you know, in a few weeks, we will get I think a final 5 from each university through their own internal process. We will need some additional help because, you know, this isn't the type of thing that only diplomats can really assess, because we may not see the nuance or the real skill or whatever. And I'd be very happy to talk to anybody else about this. But, you know, it's something that forced me to present Joyce, and in the, you know, the 10 minutes that I have presented to other colleges in Portuguese is, you know, trying to stimulate people and make them interested. Talking about my own history with reading this book, the first time I read it was when we had to rent a house for 2 weeks in South Africa as our youngest. We were expecting, and I thought, what am I going to do for 2 weeks? This is the time where I've always made that promise. I'm going to set aside and read Ulysses. And I did. And I gave her that copy when she was 21, and she has it. And, you know, by being able to tell these stories to students, these are the type of things that they respond to. And I always end, I know, Colin, you wrote a book about the US versus James Joyce, but, you know, I think there's a great quote in Ed O'Brien's book on Joyce, when they say that Prohibition and Ulysses were, the ban on Ulysses ended at the same time as Prohibition ended, and the quote that bottles and minds were opened at the same time. So those are my few words. Thanks. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Sean. Yes, talking about the end product, it will be wonderful to see this mural in what you have just described as our university architecture. Here, most of our campus are 1970s low-rise concrete buildings, which some of you have seen. And but talking about the process, that's why we're here. And this has been rewarding and fascinating to run and do. So I guess I can start talking to Nuala. Welcome back to Brazil, Nuala.
Thanks a million.
Let's start with the exhibition that you have curated for MoLI. And it's been described as focusing on the emotional heart of the Joyce family. So could you tell us more about this exhibition, its aims, inspirations, what assembling it involved?
Yeah, so I suppose, in case people don't know, the Museum of Literature in Ireland is in Stephen's Green in Dublin, the old Newman House where UCD was, where Joyce went to college. But it's not a museum of objects, it's a museum of experiences. And so when you're asked to curate an exhibition in this museum, you do realize you're not going to be operating in objects, you're going to be operating in some other medium. And so I chose to do an audiovisual presentation, and I wanted it to be almost like a Joyce family slideshow. And I wanted the bonding element in it to be the Joyce's love, excuse me, of music. So when Simon O'Connor, who's the director of MoLI, asked me to curate this, he already had the title. He had decided the 2022 exhibition would be called Love Says Bloom. So I had a word, love, and I had a concept, music. And so the love of music that the four Joyces shared. And I brought Stephen into it as well because of how important he was and how recently he died. He died in January 2020. So I wanted this to be an intimate, circular event where the viewer would feel involved. So I came to Simon with this idea of a zoetrope, which, if you know, it's like a Victorian moving images that goes around the viewer. And Simon was immediately open to this idea, and we worked with that as our starting point. And then Benedict Schlepper-Connolly, who works in MoLI, I worked very closely with him, and we assembled and got permission to use certain images, certain music. We commissioned musicians like Julia Spanu of Moxie, Ian Lynch of Lancome, Lisa O'Neill, to sing songs for us for this audiovisual piece that were important or related to the Joyces. And then I wanted it to be circular, as I said, because circularity is important in Joyce. And so we devised a series of 10 chapters, and each chapter would have an emotion and a mood. And so it starts on light and joy. So you have this dancer that's like a zoetrope. I had this idea that the dancer would dance around the viewer in the room, but technically that didn't work out. But the filmmaker and Benedict, when they filmed the dancer, did a sort of a circular thing. So it works beautifully. So on one wall, we have the visuals, on another wall, we have the text that comes up. And so the viewer sits sideways, visuals here, text here, sound kind of all around you. And it's a 22-minute loop of dance, music, visuals. A lot of the sort of more intimate pictures of the Joyces on holidays in Belgium, the Joyces at garden parties or outdoor, sitting in gardens, eating, you know, that famous picture that Alan also has in his film of Joyce like this, you know, looking kind of grumpy and normal. So them in their most normal states. Lucia liked taking pictures, and so some of her pictures are in it. So I wanted to show really the Joyces as a family. They very much had their own language, or languages, as we know. They had their own family sense of humor, and like many Irish families, they bonded through music. And so I picked songs like the Lass of Aughrim, which Joyce called Your Song to Nora. Nora's mother sang it to Joyce when he visited her in 1909. So it sort of was a bonding song between them. It turns up in The Dead, as we know. So I wanted to show Joyce more as the tender, loving, open-hearted family man than as the sort of tricky genius that maybe people have in their heads about him. So there's a lot of emotion in the piece, and I wanted that. In fact, even though the first piece, the zoetrope of the dancer who represents both the children, actually, even though it's supposed to represent light and joy, we used the music that was played at Joyce's funeral, which was Tu sei morta from Monteverdi. But it's this incredible music, and there's this lovely contrast between the beautiful fluid movement and light of the dancer and this sort of very almost baroque sort of singing. So it's a piece of contrasts. Simon was joking when we launched it that he'd have to provide boxes of tissues because people were coming out feeling very emotionally overwhelmed by it. And yeah, it was an absolute joy to work on. A lot of work, but beautiful work. And as a writer, I don't do a lot of collaborative stuff. It's just the nature of what I do. So to collaborate with people who are very positive, that everything almost was yes, zoetrope is possible. Everything was technically possible that I came up with. And then the artists we invited to collaborate with us were just stunning. And I'm dying for everybody to see it. I'm dying for, loads of feedback on it. And, parts of it may go online as time progresses, but obviously the whole exhibition can't go online yet. It may do anon in the way that Alan's film is now viewable online, which is a real treat for everyone. So I'm hoping eventually that will happen. It runs until the 3rd of July. So if you get a chance to be in Ireland this year, please do come and see it.
Yeah, thanks, Nuala. I was thinking that I hope some of us will have a chance to visit, but I'm sure MoLI will facilitate access to at least part of it, because they've been doing a great online link with other parts of the world. Fascinating. And it's fascinating to hear about the collaborative nature of the curation. Yeah, I was wondering how you managed to assemble all that. But that's a very important facet of the work of curating. Yeah. So emotion is, as you've mentioned, the center of the exhibition. And so is, I suppose, love the center of your book, your Nora, a love story of Nora and James Joyce. So your book has been acclaimed and by fellow novelists like Ed O'Brien, Joseph O'Connor. And as I have already mentioned, it's the choice for Dublin One Book this year, a perfect choice, I think. So could you tell us, and I have my copy here, I always do my homework. So my paperback copy. So how does your novel, because you've just told us how the exhibition dealt with their love and emotion and family life. So how does your novel deal with Nora and Joyce's life story? There are so many aspects I would like to discuss, but I'll leave that to you first.
Yeah, I suppose my publishers picked the subtitle, A Love Story of Nora Barnacle and James Joyce. That was not my choice at all. And I was a bit wary of it because I thought, oh, this is trying to sell this now as some sort of romance, which it very much isn't. Any of us who know anything about the Joyce family story know that it was bad and it got worse. I'm not saying it was a terrible love story, but there was a lot of love there, but there was also a lot of difficulty. But publishers make these choices and they're a marketing thing and they're a sales thing and they're kind of nothing to do with you as the writer. You don't get that sort of input. But I wanted to tell Nora's side of the story. So it's a first person point of view, present tense story. Yeah. And I've been writing these biofictional novels for a good few years now. And I suppose the thing is for me is I love mavericks. I love maverick women and I love historic maverick women especially. And so I come at these subjects with love. I'm not going to spend 2 years writing a book about someone who I don't love and who I don't think other people, I want other people to love them and understand them as I feel I do. So it's about empathizing with a person and it's about embodying that person and bringing them to the reader as a living, breathing, emotional person with feelings. So I knew Nora already as this, strong wife and muse, this Edwardian maverick who had run away with Joyce. So I revisited the research to find out more. And I wanted to write there's a great quote from Hilary Mantel, and she talks about when you use real people from history, the future is blank for them. And so when you write a book like this, it's a good idea not to over-research at the start, but rather drip feed the research to yourself. And so that the life, even though you know the life is opening out to you as a storyteller as much as it is for the players. And so even though I was familiar with the Joyce story, I'd read Maddox's biography when it came out when I was 19. And I had seen obviously Pat Murphy's film, Nora, and I read Ellman and all of that. I still sort of treated it as if I was Nora in a sense, and I was embarking on this life with this man who I knew nothing about. So I have always disliked the smudging of Nora by other biographers. I feel like there was a lot of snobbery about her, a lot of misunderstanding, and a lot of it was cultural. A lot of the expat crew in Paris, for example, did not understand culturally where Joyce and Nora were coming from, that they had a very Irish marriage, that their sort of sense of humor was very, very much an Irish thing. And so I wanted to show that this very earthy, dynamic, pragmatic, yes, uneducated woman who liked reading but didn't worship at the altar of literature was the perfect partner for Joyce. She wasn't a literary wife in the sense of, say, a Vera Nabokov. She didn't do his typing. but she was very much his rock as well as his muse. So I wanted to show her contribution to the life of Joyce and how she helped him stay grounded, helped him stay well, dragged him home from the bistros when she needed to. She was basically the water to his fire. She was good for him. And, you know, I'm not in the business of hagiography. I'm not in the business of lying about people. I want as much of the truth as possible. And so I don't go in with rose-colored glasses. I want them warts and all. And I hope that's what I've presented, you know.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm sure this is what you presented from the very first pages. It's captivating and it's unexpected. For those, I suppose most people haven't seen the book, but it's a very quick, it's organized as a diary with dates, and all the chapters are very short. So there is a sense of the progress of their lives, and it's very interesting for everybody who knows a little bit of their lives. But anyway, last night, like your publishers, I selected a piece that I wanted you to read today. And I'm sure maybe you would have picked a different one. So let's do the following. First, you read my piece, because I picked the chapter for the occasion titled Ulysses.
Yeah, I'll just read a short piece of this chapter, just a page, just to give people a flavor. Yeah. So this is...
and then if you can choose one that is dear to you in terms of showing Nora, that would be great too.
So this is February 1922. It's Paris, and it's Joyce's 40th birthday. And I'll just read a page or so. 8 o'clock in the morning, and there's a rap at the door, and Miss Beach carries in the package like the priest carries his chalice to the altar. Jim is battling tears as he unwraps the book and lifts it out. The blue jacket shining as bright as the Mediterranean in summer. He sets down Ulysses. There it is, he says, here at last. Lucia and Giorgio swoop in, but instead of squabbling as they usually might, they take it in respectful turns to hold the novel and marvel at its size and weight and loveliness. See, it's the colour of the Greek flag, Jim says. The white lettering represents the islands. I stand by Jim, my hand on his shoulder, staring at the book with what feels like a mother's pride. This is Jim's years of work, all bound together and ready for its readers. He put great effort into it. Even when his eyes were at their sorest, he composed this novel in his head. I may not love the innards of it. I may object to bawdy MoLI, but I'm proud of him, yes, and honoured to know him and impressed by his labour. And I'm made quiet by those feelings. For all his faults, Jim's an extraordinary fellow, truly, a great writer. Congratulations, Joyce, Miss Beach murmurs. The other copy will go in the window of Shakespeare and Company, and people will throng to see it. And then when the rest of the copies arrive, they'll go like those proverbial cakes, I assure you. How can I thank you, Miss Beach? Jim says. Your courage is phenomenal. She reddens, shakes her head and slips away, telling us she will see us soon. So I'll just leave it there. They went to Ferrari's that night and they had a bit of fun showing the novel around, copy number 1, I suppose, of Ulysses around the restaurant. And she had to drag him home that night too, because he hadn't eaten anything, but he had drank a bit. So she brought him home.
Fantastic. So can you think of an extract that is dear to you in terms of showing the character that you wanted to show, that is Nora?
Yeah, I suppose on the first page, maybe we get a sense of her. Well, I'll just read the first page. I won't go into the detail of what happened, but yeah, I'll just read. It's very brief. So it's the 16th of June, 1904. They've met already on the 10th, had a failed meeting on the 14th, and now this is the first day they walk out together. We walk along by the Liffey as far as Ringsend. The river smells like a piss pot spilling its muck to the sea. We stop by a wall, Jim in his sailor's cap, looking like a Swede. Me in my wide brimmed straw, trying to throw the provinces off me. Out there, the Muglin's rocks, Jim says, pointing out to sea. They have the shape of a woman lying on her back. His look to me is sly to see if I've taken his meaning. I have, and our two mouths crash together, and it's all swollen tongues and drippy spit and our fronts pressed hard and a tight bunched feeling between my legs. His hands travel over my bodice and squeeze, making me gasp. Oh, Jim, is all I can manage to say, and I step away from him. You have no natural shame, Nora, he says, and he's coming at me now with his thing out of his trousers and in his hand, that one-eyed manine he's no doubt very fond of. It looks, I think, like a plum dressed in a snug coat. No natural shame, I say. Don't be annoying me. Do you think because I'm a woman that I should feel nothing, want nothing, know nothing? But I dip my nose to his neck for a second, the better to breathe his stale porter, lemon soap smell, span new to me. Jim squints and smiles. I kneel on the ground before him, my face before his tender manine, and glance up at him. I leave it there. It goes into the detail, but I won't give it to you.
Thank you so much, Nuala. I just began to read the book, so I'm looking forward to carrying on with the exploration of this fascinating character. So my last question to you is, there's been, not a lot, but some decentralization of the focus of Joyce's life story on Nora, and in the case of Áine, on Lucia. And with the film, for instance, you've mentioned by Pat Murphy, Nora. So how do you think this shift in perspective speaks to readers and audience of our time?
I mean, it gives a more rounded view, and it shows, and this is what I want my novel to show, was that great art is never made in isolation. It's always made with supports and collaborations. And Nora, you know, and Beach and Weaver and Monnier and all of these people were so supportive and crucial to Joyce. Heap and Anderson as well in the States. You know, women were smudged and sidelined for so long in these stories, and it's just about, it just became really tiresome and sort of anger inducing to see how they were never acknowledged, you know, all of their great labor that was done, to see them downgraded out of snobbery and so on. Elena Ferrante talks about women being herded into a literary gynoeceum, and I see a kind of a spousal gynoeceum for a lot of these women who were doing Trojan work behind the scenes. When Brenda Maddox mentioned to Richard Ellman that she was thinking of writing a biography of Nora, he said, there's not enough. And you'd have to wonder, did he mean there's not enough material, or there's not enough of interest to say about this woman? Anyway, Maddox proved him wrong and wrote an excellent biography of Nora. I don't agree with all of her stances on Nora, but she did a very good and forensic job. So yeah, I think that we've just gotten fed up of the one side of the story, and now we need to see all of the parts and all of the pieces that made up the life of people like Joyce. It's a real pleasure to research this book and to write this book, and now to talk about it. And it's interesting to hear other people's points of view about all of the players. I've really been enjoying that. So yeah, it was time.
Yeah, wonderful, Nuala. Wonderful to have you here. And I recommend Nora to everybody who is interested in this life story.
Thank you.
So now I think we can invite Kathleen and Alan into the conversation, and to see Alan's take into this this fascinating couple.
Yes. Okay. So, so Alan, welcome to our conversation here. So I just wanted to tell you that my perception of your film, in a way, it feels like a puzzle. This gorgeous assemble of these images and ideas and sounds. So I think your film really gives us, as viewers, a kind of a freedom to make the connections which is not very, the traditional storytelling, but I think that's amazing. And this is, for me, cinema at its best form, because you as a viewer, you participate in the process of understanding the narrative, of constructing the narrative, the images, the sounds, the narration, the soundtrack, all of it together. So we're curious about something. I think the first thing we must ask you, Alan, is what inspired you to make Ulysses film, and what did the process of making the film involve? Tell us.
Well, actually, the inspiration started way back in Florianopolis, almost by accident. I'd made a previous film that Beatrice made, which was a kind of life of Yeats. It was a sort of reading of Yeats in a relatively experimental way. And it was shown in Brazil. And after that, Margaret Kelleher of MoLI and UCD fame, who you'll all know and love, and Sean's predecessor in Brazil, both said, wouldn't it be interesting to do something like that for Ulysses? And when they say that, I suppose it was kind of a response. It was kind of a reading. It wasn't a film of Yeats's life. It wasn't a film of Ulysses. It was kind of a creative response, a reading. And that was attractive in a couple of ways. One, as a filmmaker, you're always delighted to be asked to do anything. But the maybe the higher instinct was that even though, I read a lot, I love reading, I'd studied Joyce in university in Trinity, I probably never really, if I was honest, got Joyce, that if, my favorites were kind of Beckett and Yeats, and maybe Synge. And as a student in Trinity, studying English and directing plays and making films and all that stuff, I was always drawn to Yeats and Beckett. And Joyce, kind of, if I was honest, probably left me a little cold. And I knew that lack was definitely more in me than in the book. And while I could admire Ulysses, I'd have to say I didn't love it. So one of the attractions of making the film, of making any of these films that are in a way a response to literary figures, as Beatrice said, I've just finished a film around the kind of literary life of Dublin in the 40s and 50s. And when I say finished, I finished it about midnight last night. So one of the joys of that is that it forces you as a reader, in the best way, to really engage with it, So, when you're doing a film on Yeats or a film on Ulysses, you have to kind of move beyond your casual reading, and you're forced to read it intensely. And that was a real joy. And of course, as I launched into it, and also both a close reading of the novel, but also, I love to walk, and just to walk the city. I mean, I grew up in Dublin, I know it well, I like to walk, but also to kind of walk the book endlessly. Was just this lovely personal kind of pilgrimage into this amazing world that, of course, Joyce is. And of course, it's a wonder. And so when it came to making the film, it's almost a contradiction in terms, a film of Ulysses. I mean, that's a kind of ridiculous sort of arrogant thought. So it's, as I've always said, it's kind of a response to Ulysses. It's an echo of it. Like every individual reading of any book is an echo of the book. There'll be, thousands of interpretations of Nora, and likewise, this was kind of my reading. And I felt that if out of this extraordinary cosmos that Joyce has created, I could just pull out a few words, phrases, sounds, music, images that somehow evoke it. And of course, I was conscious that it was going to be primarily displayed in MoLI itself. And I felt that if I could conjure a little room where people might wander in, some might stay for 20 seconds and some might stay for an hour and a half, that somehow it would open a little chink of light into the book. And one phrase, one color, one piece of music might just pull them into Joyce's world. But also, that was the sort of grandiose aspiration. But the personal aspiration was that lovely thing of launching myself just personally into this wonderful book.
Yeah, when you say, just feeling Dublin in your film, I have to be honest that as I was watching the film home in my computer, and I would hear the birds, and I had to pause and see, is it from outside or from here? So you did, in a way, with the sounds, it did capture very much, in my opinion. Yeah. And I was also curious about knowing why is it defined like a film installation rather than just a film, and how does that relate to your film work in general?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's a film, I suppose.
Okay.
So, some of the reasons I say installation is its initial incarnation was in that room in MoLI, and somehow film seemed a little almost pompous for it, but I like to think of it as a film, and I like to see it in cinemas, and it's lovely now that it's starting to, it was on in Paris last week, and it's beginning to be seen in a wider world. But I suppose the last thing just on making it, which of course is the core, which is the voice of the book. And for a long time, that was a bit of a conundrum. The images, the sounds, the music, I somehow could see all that, hear all that. But then I was, and for a long time, I thought I wouldn't have a voice in the film, let the book speak for itself, let the reader read it. But that seemed maybe a little purist. And I just couldn't find my way into what that voice would be. And I thought about actors, and I thought about this, and I really wasn't hearing the book. And fairly late in the process, by total coincidence, I was driving the wonderful Irish poet Paul Durcan down Sandyman Strand. I was taking him shopping. It was a very domestic scene, Tesco, sliced cheese and cream crackers. But and Paul was saying, "What are you doing?" And I was saying, "I'm going across Sandyman Strand." And Paul started to talk beautifully about Joyce as a poet. That of course he was a poet, that's all he was. And that when Paul Durcan and Michael Hartnett, who were both young poets together, Joyce was their idol. He was the great Irish poet, not Yeats, not any of the others. It was Joyce. And that they used to, in their 20s, leave the pub and go walking down Sandyman Strand, quoting Joyce at each other. And he said we were both pretending to be Joyce, and then he stopped and he said, "No, Michael Hartnett thought he was Joyce." And of course, anybody knows Paul Durcan's work and his own performance. He's an extraordinary performer. He's an extraordinary actor. And I suddenly thought, yeah, Paul could do it. Paul could definitely do the voice. And actually, in my experience with any literary stuff, actors seem to me never the best readers of literature. Other writers tend to be the best readers. And, in the past, I've done things. I did a thing on the Irish in World War I, and the writers there. And I found John Banville reading Tom Kettle, and he did it far better. His sense of rhythm, his feel for it was far better, I think, than an actor, which might be a bit unfair to actors. But so in a way, that entered us in a second phase, which was Paul, the great eye for detail. And he read the novel 7 times in the course of making the film. And then we started to record pieces of it. And that in itself was a real joy. And I think, if Paul had the stamina, I would love to just record the entire thing with him. But yeah.
Well, he does have an extraordinary voice, and you can tell like the emotions and the feelings, the interpretation that he gives to certain parts of the novel. It's really amazing. So talking about UFSC now, the chapter that was selected for UFSC for the Ulysses100 Through Brazilian Eyes is chapter 6, Hades. So we're going to watch a short extract from your film of Hades, and then we're going to come back here and talk a little bit more about it, okay? All right, so Harissa, take it away.
Okay.
It might thrill her first, courting death, shades of night hovering there with all the dead stretched about, the shadows of the tombs when churchyards yawn, and Daniel O'Connor must be a descendant. Have you ever seen a ghost? Well, I have. It was a pitch dark night. The clock was on the stroke of 12.
Though the heart
Turkish graveyards.
Okay, there you go. Lots to unpack there. But Alan, could you just comment like to us in briefly, like what was the making of this chapter into film to you in particular?
Well, I suppose, naturally what I did is, my first reference point for all the episodes was Joyce's schemas, and so each episode took the various themes and colors. Obviously that's black and white, and it's death and graveyards and heart, and so that's possibly one of the more austere passages. But what I tried to do in a kind of abstracted way was follow the schema, Joyce's own schema. And then also, one of the lovely things about doing it is that even if it doesn't necessarily resonate off the screen, every little detail, that is actually Joyce's old passport in the footage, and I remember being in the archive in the University of Buffalo, and I went there to film various things, and they brought out to me, like sacred relics, Joyce's glasses and his passport and his cane. And obviously there's only so much of the power of those objects you can translate into film, but it was very special just to feel, actually, these are his glasses here in front of me. And so I tried to draw on bits and pieces of just almost like a magpie. It was a little collage of collecting bits that had some moment, at least in my mind, that they carried a little bit of power. And actually, even I'd sort of forgotten, but I was just, when I watched the first shot of the shadow of the window, there's a shadow of a big window on a floor. And before MoLI was transformed into the wonderful place it is now, I went in and I filmed the shell of the building. And that's actually the shadow on the floor is the floor of the old exam hall in Newman House, which is where the main exhibition is. But before it was, changed and redeveloped. And it was the exam hall Joyce would have sat in. So even those little things, even though obviously they're not obvious to the viewer, I think it's lovely just to have those moments, and coincidentally, I was just looking at that footage, and it's amazing to see the building before MoLI became MoLI. Yeah. So, the idea was that each image or sound or whatever, in that case, it's quite sparse, had some resonance with some part of the book. And obviously you don't need to know every resonance, but somehow the mixture of it hopefully strikes a chord.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah. So many details. Oh gosh. Yeah. But Alan, thank you so much for talking to us. It was amazing. I'm sure we can have some more questions in the Q&A later on. And now let's go to Áine talking to Colin.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Colin. Great to have you
Hello.
here. Long time no see, since 2019, is that right? So, Colin, great to have you here. You are, I dare say, the leading voice in documentary drama in Ireland nowadays. Is that right?
I leave that to you. I wouldn't award myself that title. But look, there's not that many of us doing documentary drama here, and I'm one of them. Certainly, Anu would be, who I work with occasionally, would be very prominent in that area, doing a very different kind of documentary work. Anyway.
Okay, very modest. My first question to you is why documentary drama and why documentary radio drama as a means of artistic expression?
Yeah, so I came to writing plays through writing journalism. Now, going back to college, what I was doing was, studying arts generally and putting on plays. So I suppose that was there as a kind of first instinct. But I had some idea that to learn to write journalism would be a good kind of craft to do that. And I found I just really liked the process of sifting through facts and trying to put order and structure on them, and finding the story in the news, the story in the current affairs, and I suppose in a kind of gradual sense, like a lot of journalists, they learn to write news stories, and then they write features and profiles and maybe longer form journalism. And in a sense, I sort of continued that journey, and started writing plays, So, the phrase, I always wrestle a little with the phrase documentary drama, because I sort of feel it kind of marginalizes the work I'm doing in a sense, which is, it's just storytelling. It's drama. I seem to be drawn to stories that are true. And that may be maybe a weakness on my part. Of imagination, or the great advantage of telling stories that are true is that there's never a blank page, because there's always the research, so there's always something to work from, and I'm very drawn to that. But also there's the particular challenge that I learned to wrestle with first in journalism, that's the core of the work I do, which is gathering this kind of overwhelming amount of factual material, and finding the story in it, diving into that thicket, and that's something I've just come to kind of really, really enjoy. And then in terms of medium, I'm a little bit medium agnostic, and also I'm an opportunist. Like some of the stories I've done on stage started as journalistic stories. If anything I write, I always get some journalism out of it, because it's another small paycheck. And the plays I've done on radio either started on stage, or, as in the case of this one, the United States versus Ulysses, I intend to travel it to the stage. So I sort of, for me, it's about the story and the medium that suits the story, and taking most advantage of that, because we have to make a living. And ultimately, if I can get the story onto screen, all the better. So it's about what suits the story, but it's also about finding the audience, and the bigger the audience, the better.
Thank you, Colin. There's a lot there that I would like to pick up on. The bit that you mentioned, finding the story in the news. Book ban efforts are increasing in the United States nowadays, and this is also an important topic in Brazil. But in the US, for instance, Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale has been challenged in some states in the United States. Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me, and also Alison Bechdel's graphic novel, Fun Home. So this is a hot topic in 2022, and this was also a hot topic in the early 20th century. So what is the story behind the play, The United States versus Ulysses, and what attracted you to that story in the constellation of literary, cultural, and historical aspects related to James Joyce and Ulysses?
Okay, so I'll come at that backwards, if I may. So because I described myself as an opportunist, and what attracted me to the story in the first instance was a friend gave it to me. So in a little Joycean moment, I was walking along the Royal Canal early in lockdown, and at Crossguns Bridge, which has a fleeting mention in Ulysses, I bumped into a fellow called Des Gunning, who would be well known in Dublin as a Joycean and was one of the founders of the Joyce Centre here, which is around the corner from me on North Great Georgia Street. And Des Des always has some idea he wants to plant, and this idea was the idea of doing something to commemorate the Wolsey judgment. So John Munro Wolsey, as I learned from Des on this day during lockdown at Crossguns Bridge, was an American judge who in 1933 decided Ulysses should no longer be, as it had been up to then, effectively banned. Effectively he liberated Ulysses for the American and really hence the global market in a judgment that became a landmark of American jurisprudence and in the area of freedom of expression. And so Des was saying to me, look, this great judgment, I want to do something with the Joyce Centre for, this was Bloomsday, I think 2 years ago. We were thinking of reading the judgment. And I said, oh, well, are there news reports, are there court reports from the time? Like, was a report in the New York Times? Because reading a judgment is static and it's undramatic because the judge has already decided. But maybe some of the newspaper articles might have snippets of the advocacy of the lawyers arguing, therefore you have conflicts, therefore you have drama. And this became a short and quite quickly written play based on what material we could find for the Joyce that we did for as a Zoom for the Joyce Centre, I think 2 years ago, and or maybe it was last year, it's all a blur. And then Radio 1 picked it up. And in the first instance, I had a lot of help from a fellow called Declan Dunn, who's another journalist, but also a novelist, who had researched the case himself and written a novel about it. And in the first instance, allowed me to adapt his recreation of the court case in order to do something for the Joyce Centre. And then I went back and I found the actual original documents, which were, I think, published in the 60s, all of the legal memos and that, and I rebuilt it myself from that. So that's kind of how it came to be, and what it is. I've given a brief sense of it there is, but it, in December or November 1933, Ulysses had been effectively banned in 1921 when Jane Heap and Margaret Anderson, extraordinary women who should absolutely be another play, had attempted to publish it in part form, in serial form, in their magazine, The Little Review. This had fallen foul of the authorities. They had been convicted of obscenity. Ulysses was never banned as such, but the publishers had been convicted, so no other publisher was going to touch it with a barge pole until in the early 30s, Bennett Cerf, who was this thrusting young Turk of a publisher in New York, decided he wanted to get the rights from Joyce and try and publish Ulysses and make his name. And he hired a lawyer, Morris Ernst, the leading freedom of expression advocate of his day, to fight the case. So these people, they basically constructed the case in order to get the decision that they hoped, which would say that Ulysses could be read by any American, and then allow them to publish it and make their fortunes and make their name.
You mentioned that reading, judicial cases, it's just very static, it's boring. And I think that you made an excellent job, really, creating the radio play. It's good fun, it's hilarious. You did a really, really good job. Congratulations. So I'm going to ask Harissa to play a short extract from the play, if you can, please.
Yes.
Thank you.
So travel back with us to February 1921. It is the era of Prohibition, and James Joyce's novel, not yet published in full, has been serialized by The Little Review. a literary magazine published by Margaret Anderson and Jane Heap.
This is the most beautiful thing we'll ever have.
We'll print it if it's the last effort of our lives.
One episode, known as Nausicaa, is set during a fireworks display on Sandy Mount Strand.
And then a rocket sprang.
Young Gertie McDowell is gazing at the fireworks.
And bang, shot blind blank.
And the novel's hero, Leopold Bloom, is gazing at Gertie.
All kinds of crazy longings.
As she gets excited by the fireworks.
And oh!
So, does he?
Oh!
Then the Roman candle burst.
And this scene so scandalizes the good citizens of the New York Society for the Suppression of Vice.
And it was like a sigh.
That they bring the publishers to court on obscenity charges.
And everyone cried, oh!
The publishers are duly convicted.
Oh, in raptures.
Fined $50 each.
And it gushed out of it.
And fingerprinted.
A stream of rain gold hair threads.
A victory for the Vice Society.
Oh, so lovely. Oh, soft. Sweet, soft.
And a blow for Joyce and his pioneering novel.
Mr. Bloom recomposed his wet shirt. Oh, Lord, that little limping devil.
The verdict has a chilling effect on the books industry and on freedom of expression itself.
Begins to feel cold and clammy.
Soiled as Bloom's wet shirt, no legitimate American publisher will touch Ulysses for a decade.
After effect, not pleasant. Still, you have to get rid of it some way.
Thank you. So many fantastic puns. I love it. And I love MoLI's voice. Colin.
Let me just say, Alina, that was Janet Moran playing MoLI there, and Jonathan White as the voiceover and Bloom, and Colin Morrison directed and Kevin Brew produced for RTÉ Radio One. So they did a fabulous job.
It's a brilliant production. Yeah, I highly recommend it. Yeah. Could you help us this initial extract sets the scene for the play, and how difficult or challenging was it to assemble, edit and record material for the play? And also, if you could talk a little bit about the actors' accents as well, because they're all Irish, aren't they? And they use American accents. Is that right?
Yeah. So there's sort of three stories within the play. At its very heart, there's the story of Ulysses, and then Ulysses has been argued over in this courtroom drama, so the lawyers are literally, talking about Ulysses, but also I had the idea that Ulysses would kind of come to haunt the courtroom, so that's the relationship between the court and the book. But there's also, through kind of very happy just discovery through the research, was that we found that so the case was in December 1933, and at that time, I think that one of the biggest things in the American media was a Friday night radio program called The March of Time, that was broadcast by CBS, and they had an ensemble of actors, and they would script reenactments of the news of the week, and the actors would play them live on air, often on site, because often the writers would be just kind of writing it up, to the last minute and handing them to the actors, and it would go out. And this company was the company that Orson Welles joined a few years later, kind of got his first kind of break as entree into radio, and they had done a report on this case on their program, which is lost. But that gave us the idea of framing this play as an episode of the March of Time. So there was this kind of little bit of an onion. The outer layer was this 1930s live radio broadcast. Inside that was a courtroom drama set in 1933. Inside of that is Ulysses itself, and then very luckily, in terms of creating the soundscape and having it's a different quality to the sound of each of those different elements, so that you're helping to guide the listener subconsciously through those layers, I don't have to worry about that. So we had Kevin Brew, who not only is a producer in RTÉ, but also is an extraordinary audiophile and technician. And he worked with Simon Kenny, who's a composer and sound designer, to create that, the soundscape. And in terms of the accents, yes, the actors are all Irish, a couple of them, based in the UK and working a lot in British and international film industries. Irish actors, I think, because we grew up listening to or watching American and British material, Irish actors seem to be very pliable, very able to do accents. And Jonathan White, who did the March of Time voices, that particularly iconic 1930s radio voice, lived in America as a young man as well, so was able to draw on that.
Thank you so much, Colin. There's so much more I'd like to explore and chat with you about the play, but unfortunately we're running out of time. And now we're moving back to Kathleen.
Yes. All right. So let's talk to Áine. Áine, hi. Welcome.
I nearly escaped.
No, we have time for you. So we're so happy to have you here, Áine, and to talk about your work. A work that is so important. It focuses on such an important figure in Joyce's life, and how you explore all these complexities of family life and art and the mental instability. It's a really wonderful work. So let's talk more about it. So tell us, why did you decide to explore the life of Lucia Joyce in all of these artistic projects? Like, what attracted you to her story?
So I first came across Lucia's story back in 2014 or 2013, I can't remember, when some friends of mine who have a band called Fathers of Western Thought invited me to be part of they were doing an musical interpretation of Joyce's major works, which was commissioned by the Joyce Centre in Dublin at the time. And they asked me to come in and sing. I'm not a particularly good singer, I wouldn't say, but I think they wanted a female vocal on the whole thing. And in one of the rehearsals, they mentioned Lucia, and I'd never heard of her before. I wasn't so familiar with Joyce either, Joyce's work at the time. And they'd mentioned a few things, obviously that she was a dancer, and my own background is in dance and choreography. So I was initially interested in that aspect of her life. But then when they spoke a little bit more, as we know that Lucia was in psychiatric care for such a long amount of time, and also about her letters of communication being destroyed by Stephen Joyce after her death as well. I was intrigued, I guess, and it just seemed very suspicious, for want of a better word. So kind of immediately after that rehearsal, I just felt a strong connection to her story, and I went and I gathered any archive materials that I could, and just started to really investigate, and it didn't really stop from there.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, investigating these, slightly unknown facts is just amazing. So let's talk about your first film on Lucia, Medicated Milk, right? That was out in 2015. So it focuses on her remaining years in St. Andrew's Psychiatric Hospital in Northampton, England. And that's between 1952 and 1982, right? That's in your website. But it was filmed in Ireland, where Lucia would have spent time during the 30s. So how does the film blend these two periods in her life? And if you could also expand on your sources for composing the film, for constructing this film, and especially in relation to Lucia's character, how is she interpreted in the film?
Yep. So the first film was very low budget. I had some support from Wicklow County Council at the time, and residency support from Dance Ireland to work at Mermaid Arts Centre in Bray, which is in County Wicklow, where Lucia spent time. So for the process, I think it was meant to be originally a live show, but I knew I wanted to be a film project, so I kind of pushed it in that direction. Did a very bad live/film performance for the premiere. And I worked with a friend of mine, Jose Miguel Jimenez, who's a filmmaker. And initially, the type of work I've been doing until that point, I had a company with a woman called Emma Fitzgerald, and we were making live performance, experimental live performance, dance performance for stage for about 8 years together. And a lot of the work looked at our own autobiographies and had a kind of particular focus on violence against women or exposing violence against women and gender inequality. So when I came to Lucia's story for Medicated Milk, for the first project, I guess I had very much an emotional connection to her story. And that's kind of what directed the process. So it explored memories, which came from Lucia's biography that she wrote when she was in St. Andrews, and also a dream diary, which I found fascinating as well. And some of the dreams are mentioned in the film, and there's a very sparse use of text, but the imagery, it's kind of like sweeping landscapes in Bray, County Wicklow at the shoreline. And also we filmed in a hotel, which I think has recently been sold, the Brayhead Inn, which is this beautiful old hotel, or was, which didn't seem to have changed in about 100 years when I went to visit it. It was run by this really lovely old lady, and there was no one in there, I think. So we filmed there in the ballroom and in the kind of main guest bedroom. I think I'm going completely off topic now, so just jump in.
That's all right.
Bring me in when you want. So yeah, the idea was I found like a selection of letters from Lucia written during that time period in St. Andrews, but they were really interesting and really, for me, revealed a lot to do with her character and personality. But it was more about her day-to-day experiences in the hospital at that point. In sections of her biography, she looked back at her time in the various countries in which she lived, but there wasn't a huge amount of information. So I really felt that it was important to go to these locations where she'd spend time and to offer those as a visual to an audience as well. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's a lot to do with memory, buried memory, and how any kind of neglect or traumatic experiences she may have had in her younger years, mainly may have caused some kind of reactions or out of the ordinary behaviors in her adult life. So it was myself and my niece who performed in it, and there's a little bit of movement. It really kind of flows. I guess the whole film is a bit like a dream in the sense that the tempo kind of flows in and out of these kind of scenic images, and then to like slow movement by my niece or myself. And this idea of going back to your inner child and trying to understand memories, and I guess with Lucia's letters in her later years when she spoke about her family, it was always extremely positive. Mm-hmm. But then to look back at the circumstances that were actually happening back then, there was like a real juxtaposition between those things, which I found interesting. And looking at the idea of kind of any kind of trauma, perhaps burying those memories so deep that she couldn't really understand them.
Yeah, it's amazing. We want to see it. No, we have to see it. Right. It's amazing because all the issues of trauma and of memory and of feelings are so complex to get into film and to get into. It's a lot of work, a lot of research that you have done to bring a visual representation of those feelings. So that's amazing. And then let's talk about Horrible Creature from 2019, your second and most recent film on Lucia's life, which was filmed in Switzerland, right? Where she also spent time. So could you tell us about Lucia's time there and how you imagined, how you interpreted the film?
Yep. So I had moved to Switzerland a little bit randomly back in 2017, early 2017. And I made contact with the foundation here, which is directed by Fritz Sen, which I'm sure all of you know. So that was a great experience to get to know Fritz and get some advice about, or obviously they have a map of all the old Joyce haunts here. But I just spent a few months investigating where Lucia would have gone to school and different places like this. And then I put in for a dance project award to make a film about her time here. That's how it came about. And so the Joyce family were here from 1915 after they left Trieste. And they were here for around 4 years, I think, initially, during which time Lucia would have learned German. And Joyce also spent time in Locarno in the Italian-speaking part, I think due to eye problems he was having in a better climate. And then later in the 1930s, Lucia received treatment not far from where I'm living now at the minute, in Küsnacht, with Carl Jung, who I think was the first or maybe the only doctor to think that she was schizophrenic. And she also went to spent time in a hospital near Geneva, where we shot as well for the film. So again, I kind of pulled out the different locations where she spent time here, and it took a bit of time to get permissions and things like this for the filming, because her school and the psychiatric hospital and a monastery in Locarno, they're all still kind of active as they were 100 years ago. So we're quite limited with time and that we had at each location, but that was interesting to go to all these places and film there. And then I'm just looking at notes to keep me.
That's all right.
Oh yeah, sorry. So when they moved here initially, they were quite poor and they lived in Seefeld, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, in Zurich, in a poorhouse apparently, which is kind of hard to imagine now that there would be a poorhouse in this area. It's lots of Porsches now. But they were living here, and Lucia they moved house a lot, probably because of financial problems. And her education was interrupted a lot as well because of her father's writing and need to move around and things like this. The film Horrible Creature focuses on how Lucia's physical and emotional environments affected her, kind of from 1915 until when she went to hospital in England, and just again kind of looked at any ill treatment or neglect she might have suffered during that time to cause any mental strain or mood disorder, which would have led to these instances that I spoke about earlier. Like there's a well-known instance where she threw a chair at her mother, or she lit a fire in her institution. But then to go back and I got access to doctors' reports as well for the second film, which was really interesting, and to see what was happening in her life at that point that may have led to these circumstances and these kind of rebellious acts, if you want to call them. So for instance, in the film, it references the fire in her institution, but the nurse actually says that she had lit the fire in her room to try and get them to open the door so she could run away, basically, which is extreme, but makes some sense under the circumstances. So yeah, again, just to try and really, for the second film, I guess it was less of an emotional drive for me. I was very much invested in her story, but I wanted to stick to the facts rather than just more of my own perspective on it. So any of the text comes from Lucia's diaries or doctor's reports or letters from family, friends, communication.
Yeah, that's amazing, the amount of research that goes into making a film like this. So we're going to watch three extracts from Horrible Creature. So yeah, let's do this.
Okay.
Fia's book Huxley, whose reputation she has known since her childhood. During the last night, great nervousness and finally sleeping in the bed of the nurse. Transferred to the sanatorium of Dr. Brunner in Kusnacht.
Okay, yeah, that was great. So Áine, thank you so much for being here and talking to us about your films. We really want to see them all. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Back to you, Beatriz.
Thank you. So thank you very much, everybody. We have already run out of time, but I can't thank you enough for joining us for this process of celebrating Ulysses 100. But before we go, I still would like to hear from Nuala, reading an extract of a beautiful page that I loved in her novel.
Okay, so this is a tiny chapter. You'd be relieved to hear I write very, very short chapters. This one is called Ireland. They're 1 month into their relationship. Finn's Hotel, Dublin, July 16th, 1904. To Jim, I am Ireland. I'm island-shaped, he says, large as the land itself, small as the Muglins, a woman on her back, splayed and hungry, waiting for her lover. I'm limestone and grass, heather and granite. I am rising paps and cleft of valley. I'm the raindrops that soak and the sea that rims the coast. Jim says I am harp and shamrock, tribe and queen. I am high cross and crowned heart held between two hands. I'm turf, he says, and bog cotton. I am the sun pulling the moon on a rope to smile over the Mamturk mountains. Jim styles me his sleepy-eyed Nora, his squirrel girl from the pages of Ibsen. I am pirate queen and cattle raider. I'm his blessed little blackguard. I am, he says, his auburn marauder. I'm his honourable barnacle goose. Nora, Jim says, you are syllable, word, sentence, phrase, paragraph, and page, your fat vowels and shushing sibilants. Nora, Jim says, you are story. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Nuala. I think we leave, I'm aware of the fact that we have a couple of questions, but I will direct the questions to whoever the questions are addressed to later on and get back to the person who sent the questions. I think we all leave with our own stories, reflecting upon Joyce and Nora and Lucia's stories themselves. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks a million. Bye-bye.